let's continue where we left off. So in the previous video, we set up our character pawn, but it's not yet following any rotation. So next up, we're going to fix that. We're going to add rotation to our character pawn. All right. So in order to do this, we are again going to make use of something that is crucial or built in the design of the Unreal Engine. So if I open up my player character, for example, and I select my BP player character itself, if I then scroll down to pawn and have a look, you'll see that by default it uses controller rotation yaw. So what does that mean? Well, a very common design that is often implemented in the games created by Epic Games, the creators of the Unreal Engine, is to use the controller rotation as the base for the rotation of the pawn. So in the case of a first-person shooter, the controller rotation will be directly set via input, and the pawn rotation just follows along. In case of a over-the-shoulder third-person action game, the controller rotation will set the desired rotation of the camera, of the spring arm, um, and then the pawn rotation will be limited be limited around the z-axis, which is the yaw, right? So by default, it's kind of configured to use a third-person camera setup. Now, having this separation can facilitate different setups, right? Because it can mean that we can just set the rotation of our controller and then basically switch between first-person cameras or third-person cameras, and depending on what setup we're using or what pawn we're using, the input can be handled differently for the rotation of the character and as such the camera. So what we'll have to do is basically go into our controller and set the controller rotation. So let's do that. Let's have a look at how we can do that. And at the same time, what I'll do is I'll add controller support. So I have a controller connected to my PC. So we'll add controller support at the same time, um, just so we also kind of go through um, the setup of that. So let's go to our project settings and then again go to engine input. Let's maximize this. And the first thing that I will do is I'm going to extend our movement forward and movement right. I'm going to add another entry here. I'm going to go to my gamepad and let's just search for gamepad. Use my left thumbstick, and my left thumbstick for the move forward is going to be the y-axis, and movement right. It's going to add a left thumbstick. I'm going to use the x-axis, and because the input is already an axis, we don't have to scale it, right? We can just use it as is. So I'm just going to quickly test this. So I'm going to use my controller as input now, and it seems to be working, right? I can move slowly, I can move quickly. Input is working, so that's great. So let's go back to our project settings and our input. So next up, I'm also going to make it so that I can aim with my mouse controller input. So under my axis mappings, I am going to add another one. And let's see, let's add look up. All right. And that's going to be my right gamepad, right thumbstick. And that's going to be the y-axis. And then I'm going to add another one, another axis mapping. And it's going to be my look right. And for that, we're going to again right thumbstick x-axis. All right. So with that, we have our input set up for controller twin stick aiming. Good. So now let's go to our player controller. So the BP my player controller. And we already have our movement input, and that's being taken care of for both the controller as keyboard and mouse input. Now I want to add some controller aim input. And that's the first thing that we're going to add, and then we're going to add aim inputs through the mouse, right? Just as an example. Um, this is useful to know how to do it. We'll then temporarily disable it as we move forward, and later on we'll enable it again once we start adding some additional flavor to our game. So let's do the same workflow, right? So we're going to take our input. Let's see, look up. We're going to take the event. We're going to take our look right. Going to take the event. Oh, sorry. Look right. To use the axis event. And we are going to do something a little bit different. We're still going to use the events, but we are going to combine them here. So we're going to make a vector. And I'm going to take the look up. I'm going to put it in the, let's see, X. And then I'm going to take the look right. I'm going to take that in the Y, right? Because the X is forward and the Y is sideways. And then what we'll do is we'll add a branch, or just hold down B, click. And if either of these gets fired, then we're going to do a check. So the values of the inputs will already be set, right? But these events will be called whenever input is detected. So say that this one is called, well then the access value of this one and that one will both be available, but just at that moment the branch will be fired. So if that one is called, vice versa. If both are active, well then it will be called twice, but that's fine, right? We're just going to do it twice, but the result is going to be the same because the input that's being processed is going to be the same. We're just using the events to detect them at the right time when we need them. So what we're going to do is we're going to detect if our input is big enough. So I'm going to take this, I'm going to get my vector length right here. I could also use vector length squared, but for now I'll just use vector length. And what we'll do is we'll check if this is bigger than a certain value. So let's say if this is bigger than 0.25. If that is the case, then we're going to do our branch. All right. So if our input is big enough, and the reason why we do this because with controllers you can often have a little bit of some feedback where you release the stick, it can kind of bounce to the other side a little bit. So I don't want to detect that. So as long as our input is big enough, so we really have the player intent, then I want to set the rotation of my controller. So if that is true, I'm going to set my controller rotation. Oop, hold on. Right click, set control rotation. Sorry, wasn't control. Set control rotation. So if true, target is going to be self. Going to set our control rotation, and our rotation is going to be going to convert our input vector here. Rotation from x vector. And that's going to be a rotation, like that, like so. All right. So this is effectively going to be controller aim input. It's going to set the control rotation, um, and our character will rotate in the direction that we are entering, right? Good. So let's see if this will already do something. I'm not sure if it will be, but if it will, but we might as well test it. So we're moving, and yep, it's rotating. It is very snappy though, right? It's almost instant. And I can also see that my Y is inverted. So I will need to make a change here in my Y axis. but it seems to be working. Excellent. Good. It's not ideal yet, but we'll fix it in a moment. So the first thing that I'll do is I'll go back to edit. Oh, not editor preferences. I'll go to edit, project settings, go into my input, invert my Y, minus. There we go. And let's head back to the player controller. All right. Good. Was that the correct one? Let's double check though. Was it the upwards? It's always good to double check your stuff. So let's go back, input, look up. Yes, so let's have a quick test. Let's give priority. Yep, it's working correctly. Good. So now we have controller inputs at least roughly implemented. Good. So the next thing that I want to do is I also want to have aim input with my mouse, right? I want to be able to control the rotation with my mouse. So what we'll do here is similar to how we implemented it in Unity, in our Unity project. We'll use some raycasting to see in what direction that we want to move. So let's implement some inputs. So first off, I'm going to detect my mouse X. So I'm going to get the mouse X position. So if I hover over this, the current value of the mouse X axis once per frame when input is enabled for the containing actor. So I'm going to have my mouse X, and I'm going to add my mouse Y. Again, using events. There we go. And similar as above, I'm going to make a vector. Combine these two values. There we go. And I'm going to do the same check. So if my vector length, if that is big enough, so if it is bigger than 0.25, then if that is true, so let's add another branch, hold down B. If that is true, I'm going to double click here, then we want to do something, right? So, all right. So I want to know, you know, under my cursor if I'm hitting something. So let's try something. Let's right click and get hit result under cursor. So I'm going to set get hit result under cursor by channel. We're going to trace complex. We're going to trace only over the visible channels. There we go. And we're going to add another branch. Set that to connected to be connected. And so if we hit something, then we will continue. And what I'll do is I'll drag from my hit result and I'll break my hit result. So that will basically give me all the information about my hit results. Okay. And what I want to know is I want to know the location right here. So I want to calculate in which direction I should be facing. So I'm going to need to take the current location of my controller, of my pawn, and then compare it with the location that my aim cursor is located at, and then we'll convert that into a rotation. So let's see. Let's get a get controlled pawn right here. And from our controlled pawn, we will get the get actor location right here. So now I know where my pawn is located. Good. And now what I'll do is I'm going to add an additional node. I'm going to do a find look at rotation. So find the rotation for an object at start location to point at target location. So our start location is our character and our target location is going to be location from our hit result. So now I have a rotation, but I want to make some changes. So what I'll do is I want to make sure that we are only looking in the rotation, the yaw rotation, right? I don't want up and down, left and right. Otherwise, our character will be making weird rotations. I don't want that. So I kind of want to break this thing, the return value, and kind of make some changes to it, and then create a new rotation based on that. What I can do is right click on this and select split struct bin. And this will basically break it down into the different components. I can then right click somewhere and make rotator. I'm just going to take my yaw. The rest can remain 0. Then just as above, I'm going to do a set control rotation. Set control rotation like so. I'm going to connect the rotation value. So and if I actually hit something under my cursor location, then we're going to do this. All right. I'm going to hit compile. I'm going to hit save. And let's see if that is working. There we go. So now I'm moving my mouse around and I'm actually rotating in the different directions. Right? I'm not yet seeing where I'm looking at. I don't have a preview or anything, but as you can see, it's actually working. I'm not going to bother in this example to have fallback if there's no environment to be hit. Our environment is big enough to kind of handle that in our case. So that'll be fine for now. We could add some fallbacks that if we don't hit anything that we then face a certain direction, but things should be fine for now. Now, as you could see, the rotation of our character is kind of instant, right? It's not smooth, it's not pleasant. It's a bit too harsh. So I'm gonna make some changes here. So what we'll do now is, just as with our player pawn example, we're going to store our desired rotation and then lerp towards that rotation in the controller. Lucky for us, we don't have to do that ourselves. It's actually already part of the character movement component. So let's open up our player character and then select our player character itself. So we're going to select the top of our component list here. And then what we'll do is I'll move down into our pawn options and I'll actually disable use controller rotation, y'all. That's right, I'm going to disable it. So what this will do is, otherwise my pawn, the base implementation of the pawn, will directly take my yaw and instantly apply it. I don't want that. I want the character movement controller to apply it. And that way I can have some rotation speed control and all that kind of stuff. So what I'll do is I'll select my character movement and then I'll navigate to my character movement rotation control. Rotation settings are right here. Right? And this is gonna tell our movement controller to look at the rotation of a controller and then interpolate our current rotation to the desired rotation using the specified rotation rate. So what we'll do here is we have our rotation rate, which is 360, and I'm going to use my controller desired rotation. Right, so we're going to use the controller rotation as our desired rotation. All right. So let's now save everything real quick. Let's go and test it. There we go. So it'll not be instant, it'll kind of lerp towards it. And as long as I'm not giving any input, right, I'm not holding my mouse, it'll remain the rotation. As soon as I give my mouse input, it will change the rotation. Right, so even if I'm like moving to the other side, not much is going to happen, even though my cursor, you can't see it right now, but you know, it's behaving as expected. Good. Now, I'm going to go back into my player character real quick. At the moment, we don't have enough support or, you know, player feedback to be able to use this efficiently, right? The mouse aim input is not really that great at the moment. It's not feeling well. We'll get back to this later on during the video courses. But for now, what I'll actually do is I'll enable the orient rotation to movement instead, right? So if I click this, this variable will actually override this one. You can see it in the documentation here as well. So what will happen now if I hit compile, hit save, and try again? My pawn will actually be facing in the direction that I'm moving. So as soon as I change my movement input, it'll rotate towards the direction that I'm moving. This will be a lot nicer for now until we get back in here and kind of add some additional helpers to make the other input more enjoyable, right? But for now, we'll leave it as this. We'll have the rotation automatically based on that setting. All right, I'm going to leave it for here. And in the next video, we'll start adding some weapons.